the process that actually yields the most ATP in respiration is this process here, the electron transport chain. And you'll very soon realize why it yields so much ATP. So, as I've pointed out to you people many times in the previous videos, NADH and FADH2, the carrier or the coenzymes, carrier molecules, what they do is they arrive at the inner membrane of the mitochondria, okay? And at this point they get oxidized back into FAD and NAD, okay? FAD and NAD. And when they do this, what they end up doing is releasing hydrogen ions, okay? And they also release a bunch of electrons. Now electrons, oops, one second, let me use another color. They also release electrons. Now the electrons, they pass into these electron carrier proteins, okay? These electron carrier proteins, and they start moving from carrier protein to carrier protein. Start moving from carrier protein to carrier protein. And you see this movement of electrons, there are in fact many other carrier proteins, I've only drawn 2 here, but there are many carrier proteins. And the movement of electrons from these carrier proteins through the bilayer of the inner membrane is what generates energy for the active movement of these hydrogen ions, or the active transport of these hydrogen ions across the membrane. And hydrogen ions then start dominating this side of the inner membrane. And this part of the inner membrane is known as the intermembrane space, okay? So you get lots of hydrogen ions just concentrated on this part of the membrane, due to the actions of the energy carrier molecules, which generate energy, which then allow the active transport of hydrogen ions into this part of the membrane. Sorry, that's not a hashtag, that's a plus. Lots of hydrogen ions are concentrated here, okay? And what you then get is a potential gradient of hydrogen ions through this membrane. Hydrogen ions, they're water soluble. They don't pass through this phospholipid bilayer because they're not lipid permeable in that sense, because they're charged. So therefore, what happens is you get this potential gradient that's occurring between these membranes, and this potential gradient has energy, okay, virtual energy. Once there's enough hydrogen ions present in this region, you then get a potential gradient. Now, before that, let's start off with this. Because of the fact that you have a potential gradient, hydrogen ions start diffusing down this particular protein embedded in the inner membrane, which is known as ATP synthase. From its name itself, you should probably know what it does. It synthesizes ATP. And the way ATP synthase works is it gets energy from the movement of these hydrogen ions down to the into the matrix of the mitochondria. It uses that energy to drive this kind of rotor thing. It's very similar to stuff that you see in your day-to-day life in the form of a motor. That motor drives the addition, sorry, this is ADP, the addition of an inorganic phosphate molecule to ADP to produce ATP, okay? And this process is not using an enzyme. It's using this energy that's generated by this rotor. And this is the process that's referred to as oxidative phosphorylation, because of the fact that it's involved with the oxidation of these carrier molecules. These carrier molecules here, they're getting oxidized, and due to their actions you get phosphorylation of ADP. Oh my god, I only just realized that wasn't ADP, that was ATD. Don't know what that is. 1 second, people, I'm sorry. This is meant to be ADP, not ATD. God, I'm such an idiot sometimes. Alrighty then. Okay, so this is ADP. It drives the conversion of ADP plus an inorganic molecule of phosphate to form ATP, which is the energy carrier molecule, right? So, what happens to the electrons and the hydrogen atoms then, you might be asking? Well, they are made use of. The electrons escape from the membrane, and the hydrogen ions also escape. And what they do is they react with oxygen. Okay, oxygen. You guys might remember that oxygen is one of the requirements of respiration, and this is the reason why. Oxygen is the final acceptor of the electron from the ETC, and this is important to keep the ETC going. As you can see, the reason why these electrons are moving from carrier to carrier is because of the fact that they're being used up, in a sense, by the O2. If the O2 weren't accepting the electrons and the hydrogen ions to form, by the way, let me just explain what happens here. It forms H2O, which is a product of respiration. If this conversion of oxygen to H2O was not occurring, then you'd get stagnation of electrons in this end, and kind of the opposite would occur, and respiration would backtrack on itself, if you see what I'm saying. So it's important that oxygen is the final acceptor of the electrons in the ETC, and it starts to use up these molecules. So in essence, you'd form two molecules of water using 4 molecules of hydrogen and 4 electrons. And yeah, that is pretty much the process of the electron transport chain. In summary, let's talk about the yields, the energy yields, or the molecule yields that you can have from this process of respiration. Now, the first thing I want you guys to know is that oxidative phosphorylation, or the ETC, is what produces most of the ATP that we use in our body, and it totals about 32. Sorry. The whole process of respiration totals about 32 ATP molecules. Okay. Glycolysis will produce nets. Okay, so glycolysis produces a net of about 2 ATP molecules. The link reaction doesn't produce any ATP molecules. The Krebs cycle produces 2 ATP molecules because the Krebs cycle runs twice. And the reason why the Krebs cycle runs twice for every glucose is because glycolysis is because you're using 2 pyruvate molecules that are converted to 2 acetyl-CoA molecules. So you'll get an energy yield of 2 ATPs in that process. And also you'll get the remainder in the ETP. So you get about 28 ATP molecules formed from oxidative phosphorylation, and those add up to 32 ATP molecules in total, which is a very high energy yield for aerobic respiration. I'll quickly do another video on anaerobic respiration, and you'll see why aerobic respiration is far superior than anaerobic respiration in all accounts.